it's not just work. It was like, this is my life is at stake. Stagnation is very discomforting. We love change. We need to see change. It's not the case that like people like who were enslaved never laughed. The human psyche is incredible and adapts to everything, and it makes a hell out of heaven and a heaven out of hell.
Welcome to Paris, my home away from home. It's actually Montmartre, but this is my Paris. Paris to me is not the Eiffel Tower or the Notre Dame or even the Louvre. Paris to me is the quiet streets, the little bakeries, the local butcher shops. It's a place where life runs at a slightly slower speed. Tonight, I have the pleasure of cooking dinner for Thomas Chatterton Williams. Thomas is a culture critic, author, writer of many books, and a staff writer at The Atlantic. He's half black, half white, half French, half American, 100% stylish, and an excellent interlocutor.
Food defines us, but every feast must come to an end. When facing mortality, life's big questions are served.
This is Last Meal, where I prepare the dish my guest would want if it were their last.
Firstly, thanks for doing this in Paris.
Oh, that's my pleasure.
Yeah.
It's nice to make it happen like that.
This is kind of both of our second homes. One of the things I notice about this place is the shopping for food is really different, right? Because you don't go to a supermarket necessarily for things. You go to like the butcher, or you go to the fromagerie, or you go to the boulangerie, or whatever it is, and you do these little trips and you interact with producers of food that really specialize. And I think that's one of the biggest differences in the United States, and certainly in Australia as well, is that it's highly centralized and it's like optimized for convenience. But I think we kind of lose something when you optimize for convenience. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's a much longer endeavor. It requires more time spent making the purchases every day. But I kind of like that ritual. At some point in time during the day, my work is done, and I know I've got to make dinner for my kids, and I buy my groceries every day. Essentially, I buy what I don't have this kind of American dream of a stuffed fridge full of meals for a week. Every single day, I'm kind of refilling my fridge with what we're going to eat that night. And, you're getting fresh tomatoes, fresh produce. There's an amazing place that, like you're talking about specialization. There's a place around the corner from my house that doesn't just specialize in meat or beef, but specifically meat from the Charenton region of France, and it's fantastic, and
That's
so I just go there when I know I want to have specifically very good, like steak haché, or a cut of veal or a cut of beef to make, or some sausage. It's wonderful. And there's a place for the tomatoes. There's a place for everything you need for the wine. Even sometimes the wine store is specifying a kind of region that has more wine that's natural from Burgundy or something. So no, I like that kind of ritual, and it works because I don't actually know the history of this, but every arrondissement, every neighborhood within an arrondissement has a kind of market street. And it takes more time, but actually it's not that inconvenient because the butcher is next to the baker, is next to the grocer. And so you actually, you kind of have all of these different storefronts that do their own thing, but you can just walk up the street and get everything you need.
Yeah. And also you get like providers that are really passionate about what they sell.
The cheesemonger is always the most passionate in my experience.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? Yeah.
They're really passionate.
And they'll try, like, there's gateway cheeses. There's some that they'll just be like, oh, you're not ready for that one yet.
Yeah. You have to earn.
Yeah. But I feel like maybe Western society was, at one point in history, everywhere was like that. Maybe even the United States, even Britain, stuff like that. And then we started optimizing for that convenience, but then we lost something through optimizing for that. And it's a little bit about the producers and getting the good quality things, but it's also, I mean, it could be about wastage. Like you mentioned, like you don't want the fridge full of so much food that half of it you don't end up eating. But it's also like taking the time to really appreciate and inspect what you're consuming day to day.
Yeah, I was going to say it's also about the automobile and how American life was so organized around, driving to a location and filling your trunk up with goods. But that doesn't explain why you don't have this type of situation in New York, really. You don't have like market streets in New York, even though it's not a car-based society. I'm not sure what it is. I know that, food and preparation and the kind of food culture that exists in France now is very old. And it's, the way that the people in Paris live now is not that unrecognizable to their grandparents, and their grandparents would have been recognizable to their grandparents. So there's some type of continuity there, but I don't know why it wasn't present in New York over the past.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The other thing that I think about often is like things being in season is really big over here.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll go and it'll be like, oh, white asparagus is back.
It's the several weeks everywhere. That white asparagus is available, and it's the thing that's on every grocer's shelves, and it's amazing actually. Yeah, and there's that moment. My favorite moment, it's really spring when there's like I guess in English in America we call it like young garlic, but the French call it fresh garlic. It's this fantastic flavor. It's so like soft that you can actually, it's not too difficult to eat it raw. Actually, you don't have to cook it for it to be palatable. Yeah. It's just fantastic. And like, there's that moment when that's available, or then the strawberries come, or, the heirloom tomatoes. And there's that white asparagus moment. I've never seen that. Actually, in France, it's not quite as pronounced as in Germany. They absolutely, it's inescapable for a couple of weeks in Germany. It is on every menu.
Yeah.
But there's something beautiful about it. We should be actually more in tune with the seasons. I think that, there's something very strange about the way, and it's not that the French aren't eating bananas all year round or whatever, but there's something very strange in America how you just take for granted that avocados or kiwis or whatever are just constantly there, and you don't really think about it.
Yeah. And I think, I know that we can, when I say we, like as a society, we can sort of genetically modify crops such that they are around all year. And I'm not trying to make the argument that those are inferior in any way. I'll probably lose that argument the more that technology advances. But what I do think is that we lose something a little bit special that is like waiting for that thing to arrive.
Seasonality, the treat of, strawberries in season. I like living that way. I don't want to make it seem that France is out of step with time. You can get a raspberry in December in France if you want it. But there's a culture of wanting to prepare foods with the things that are in season here that I think is really healthy.
The other thing that I've noticed is they really take time with their meals, which is something that, I mean, in Australia we don't really do. And I know that in the United States it's not really like that. There's a sense of like enjoying the good life here a little bit more, I think. Sometimes that's synonymous with not much getting done. Around the country, I guess.
In August, for sure.
Yeah. But do you think that, there's some sort of a balance between maybe the way that Europeans or French live and in the States or Australia, maybe we're not taking too much time, maybe we're not enjoying the things that matter in life?
That's an interesting question. Because I think that, there's pros and cons of both kind of approaches to life. I think that there is something that is very healthy and human about, the kind of August pause, or for a lot of people in France, it seems to be much of July and August pause. And that certainly is restorative, the way that getting a good night's rest is restorative, for the pace of the whole year. But there is something also, I think, very frustrating about a society that actually doesn't allow for the possibility of productivity in certain ways, or of entrepreneurship, or of a kind of go-getting attitude that doesn't want to pause. And it becomes more difficult to do things in a society that, like, in unison shuts down. and it's harder to be out of sync with that. And so I think it is inhibiting in some ways. But then in America, you've got all these examples of people who have like maybe 2 weeks of vacation a year and they don't take it all because that would be like frowned upon. And
they'll be left behind as well.
And they'll be left behind. So there's some type of balance that I don't know is perfect in either society the way it's actually inhabited. I've been living in France for a long time, basically for 15 years now. And, there were moments of really deep frustration when it's February and March and, this kind of cliche of the group of French friends getting together to talk about renting the house for August. It's like, man, I'm focused on, I have to succeed. I'm not thinking about renting a house with you in August. It's like they're already, it's like we just got through New Year's. Like
September, they're already planning it.
They're planning. And it took me a good 3 years to even be able to allow that conversation to proceed. And it took 3 or 4 years for me to really feel at ease on an August vacation. But I was with them in the house that we rented, but I was not working. I was remote working or whatever. I just don't fully know if I even want to live in my own lifestyle, my own pace. I don't know if I want to stop working for 6 weeks out of the year. It seems very foreign. That seems very foreign to me.
Yeah,
and
me too.
And the kind of you see in France all the time, the office workers, even the office workers, not just this freelance workers, but not the knowledge economy workers, but the guys leaving an office and sitting down for 2 hours at a lunch in a weekday. And that's probably less common now than it used to be, but it is still something that I see all the time.
Yeah.
And there's some type of balance where I think sometimes I oscillate between appreciating it and being deeply frustrated.
Yeah, that I do as well. And I think I was going to ask you whether, because you're coming back and forth between the two cities of Paris and New York with such different paces, do you find yourself constantly having to recalibrate your own pace?
That's actually one of the things that I think, is really a gift of the writing life and the kind of work that, that I ended up doing because it was for various personality reasons, it suited me. But my work is kind of the constant thing that doesn't change between the places that I am. I have like my own world of work that's just like portable, and I can set it up in France and I can set it up in New York. And it used to be a question that I would ask my children's mother, like, why can't we set it up in like a tax haven or something like that? It's the same work. Why are we here?
Yeah. Why am I oscillating between the two highest tax cities on earth?
Why aren't we looking at Lisbon or something? But yeah, so that is actually a kind of a constant that also makes it easier to move back and forth, is that the work is kind of the same. And, I'm in my mid-40s, I'm of the generation where, the internet really was becoming a thing as I was, in college and leaving college. And, the world of work is kind of actually it's just not even that I bring it with me in anything other than my laptop. It's just, that is the world of work. And so that's kind of portable in a way that's very freeing. So my routine with work doesn't really change between the two places, but I do think that like the larger infrastructure of what I'm able to do has to exist in America. I couldn't have my life if I just moved to France, it would be a very different life.
Yeah. It's interesting how much technology has changed our lives and, enabled us to, as you do, sort of, oscillate between two different places or work from anywhere. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I get this sense that technology is really driving us apart somehow. Like it's almost like the internet is just this huge experiment to which none of us,
consented.
really consented, and so much talk of division rather than what brings us together these days. Do you see that changing anytime soon? And do you think that change would be from external forces or something that we somehow become able to calibrate ourselves to this new landscape after a while?
Do I think that the kind of adverse effects of everybody being connected and talking to each other all the time that we'll calibrate ourselves to that. I'm pretty pessimistic on this. I'm pretty concerned. I think that, interconnectivity has obviously done many things that have economically helped a lot of people. Like, I just have an older writer acquaintance who, moved to Paris from New York in the 90s. So about 15 or so, maybe even 20 years before I did. And he really just he lost the momentum of his career when he moved here. He made that choice. He became someone who fully lived in France. But by the time that I came here, the interconnectivity of the internet meant that I was fully in America, even though I was physically here. And that made my life possible in a way that I saw I didn't have to make a kind of choice or sacrifice that would have been most probable in a previous time. But I also think that the costs of it are worth taking very seriously. And I don't know if it's worth it actually for the kind of gains you make and staying connected for, economic or reasons of, being able to speak to just text an emoji to your mom at all times. Because I think in some ways it was more meaningful when I was first a student studying abroad, when, in the era when you wrote like an email once or twice a week, it was more like a long letter. I had I think, more meaningful interactions and correspondences with my mom. So I don't even know that the comfort of being interconnected has been a net positive. And I know that the negatives have been exorbitant. The kind of, we're all in this room yelling and arguing and doing politics and debating the society we want to have at all times together. I think it's been really toxic in France and America and all of these societies in Australia. And I don't know if the cost was worth it. And I think it's about to be a lot worse when you don't even know if you're talking and yelling at and screaming at a person or a bot. And the kind of, the barrier between artificial intelligence and even malevolent human intelligence is less easy to pick up on.
It's like, I just think our monkey brains have not evolved to be online with that many people.
We're not supposed to talk to that many people.
We're not, or just even be aware of that many people.
You're not supposed to be aware that 1,000 people are mad at you at a given moment. That's just not something that only few people who are like movie stars or something in the past experienced something like that.
Yeah, and they didn't deal well with it.
No, they all look at Marilyn Monroe. They didn't deal well with it. But
and so now that's happening at scale.
That's been democratized.
Yeah.
It's crazy. We're not set up for that.
Yeah. And I sometimes also think about there's a lot of talk as to whether social media companies are incentivized to actually divide us or make us hate one another. But then another half of my brain thinks, I don't think the algorithm optimizes for that necessarily, but it optimizes for whatever gets the most engagement. And in that sense, we're the problem. It kind of holds a mirror up to us in a way and exploits our biggest vulnerabilities. And if that's the case, then technology will just be an endless game of exploiting human vulnerabilities, which doesn't sound positive.
No, it doesn't. I mean, this is the kind of the psychological research that was done into Facebook and social media in the 2010s, right? Is that they realized that they could manipulate emotions and they could even make you sadder if they did some tweaks to your timeline, your newsfeed. This is the worst possible business model. But I don't know that there's going to be an impetus to get out of it since it's become so lucrative. I mean, I absolutely hate what's happened since Elon Musk bought X, but I'm still on it. So that just, I mean, I was on it before. I think he actually really made the product worse. And I still am on there because many of us have been on there so long that we've invested in different ways, so much time, and made some valuable kind of connections that it feels very difficult to reimagine how you would start from scratch.
And what would your career be without a product? I mean, because a lot of the time, like, you write books and you're sharing articles and things like that. You need that network. It has intrinsic value,
you feel that you do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's interesting what you were saying about texting your mum an emoji before, because I noticed something about social media that was not mentioned often. I feel slightly pernicious, which is that it allows you to keep up with what your friends are up to, which ironically, stops you from checking in to see how they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can make a more frequent but shallower kind of interaction. That's what I mean. Like texting your mom and a couple of exchanges every day is not necessarily more, I think, meaningful than writing one long letter every week or two or one long phone call.
I know, and even if you were to remove, like I take your point about that. Yes, you would have more meaning in the correspondence that you had previously before it was very short form. But even in the instance when I'm talking about someone you haven't spoken to, let's say, I can go for 4 years not having spoken to someone, but I know what they're up to because they're always updating their Instagram. So, and then one day, and one day I messaged them and I look at the last time I did that and it was 4 years ago. I'm like, that's crazy.
But you feel like their presence in your life.
Yeah.
This is just what Esther Perel, the psychologist and podcaster and public speaker I just was coming from a talk where she was using the term artificial intimacy, which is really something that I think we're experiencing at scale these days, which is that you're there and you're not there. Like I know what tons of people are doing where they're traveling. I've seen their babies be born, but we haven't actually spoken about their baby being born, or we haven't been present in each other's life in a real way. And I think that gives the illusion of camaraderie and friendship, but actually it also is the flip side of our kind of loneliness crisis, for people who are mostly, I make a huge effort to have, a lot of like in real life interactions, and I spend a lot of time with friends and family. But I think some people, what we're seeing is that some people are not spending a lot of time with people, and this is like kind of the limit of how they engage with the world. And so there's this kind of dissatisfaction because that's not actually a proper substitute for being with people.
Yeah. Do you believe that living a good life requires us to outgrow the identities that we're born into?
For me, certainly. I think that it's strange to think that the ready-made identity that you've happened to be born into is exactly the best in every way possible, that you just happen to have been born in the right language, you've got the right God, the climate where you are is perfect and the way you dress is perfect. Everything is just the way it's supposed to be because that's how you happen to be born. I find that just a perplexing, it seems, I think there's a lot of reasons to have pride in where you're from, but to also, really stress test it against what else is out there in the world. And maybe there are things that would astonish you and you'd recalibrate your identity.
Yeah.
Make it more
capacious. Is pride something that you feel?
In an identity?
No, in anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
For sure. I mean, I feel a lot of personal pride. I feel absolutely like national pride. Patriotism, I think, is a good thing.
Tell me about national pride. What makes you feel national pride?
I think that, American society made possible opportunities and trajectories that, however flawed, really are not common in this world. So, we're talking before we started rolling that, my father's grandmother was married to a man born at the end of slavery, chattel slavery. Slavery for most of human history was not that rare. It was really terrible in American history. And then I have a life, 3 generations on from that is really very different. And that is based on a lot of people, deciding that was not a society that they wanted to pass down to their kids, and they wanted to change it.
And in many cases, fighting for it.
And in many cases, fighting for it. And it took many people thinking about what a better society would look like. And that happened. And I think there's so many examples of societies that have just never done that work of improving. There are many societies in the world that are still as oppressive as they were when my father's grandparents were born into slavery. They haven't updated in any way. So there's not this kind of illusion that America is perfect. I think there's a kind of self-satisfaction that Americans can have, or certainly it was easier to have in the recent past, that that American democracy is the best that can be. There's certainly some backsliding that's possible, and there's some darkness always. But also, I think that there is great kind of liberal progress that was made there that should be celebrated, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the kind of the movement for civil rights that was a template that inspired the world. There's lots of culture that I'm proud of. Not because I think any group owns culture, but because I was able to experience in my own close proximity. I was able to experience a culture that made things that I think are of some value. But it didn't make me think that I shouldn't go out and get into the world and be astonished by what other people were doing. And, I was lucky that it wouldn't have necessarily occurred to me to do that until I went to college and I was around other people who really had more awareness of how expansive the world was, and were going abroad and were studying abroad, and it just, that being around people rubs off on you. And so I was lucky enough to be young when I first came to France, and that really astonished me. And I had already been lucky enough to read some books that things started to click for me. And then I got the kind of that bug that I think is very important to have, that I think is kind of, no matter how proud people are of where they come from, I think there's a kind of sadness if you never even know what you don't know, what you haven't seen.
Unpack that for me.
I think that there's, I don't
in other
want
cultures, you mean?
No, I don't want to, anywhere. When, you meet people in France that have never been outside of their village.
Oh, I see.
You meet people in Brooklyn who've never been to Manhattan. And there's a kind of pride that some people can have for this is where I'm from. And I don't mean to disparage that, but I do think there's a kind of smallness and sadness with not even knowing what you don't know and what's out there in the world. And as I got out, and not just in France, but, really, as you have, being lucky enough to see the world, it makes you see where you're from differently, and it enriches you. And, it's not that everywhere else is better than where you're from, but you have actually a real measure, or a more accurate measure of what you do value where you're from.
Yeah, it puts a different lens on the place that you normally reside, I guess. I mean, I even remember when I first started traveling a lot, and even when I was coming here 20 years ago, and I would sit on the bank of the Seine, and I would think oh man, if I lived here, I would do this every week or something, right? And then I thought to myself, I live in Sydney. It has one of the most beautiful harbors in the world, and I do that every week, right? But I actually used that to make a change in my life, and then I started actually doing that in the city that I was there's a bar down near the Opera House. I would go down there and have a martini or something like that, and really appreciate the place that I actually lived. And so I think even reflexively, traveling makes you appreciate the place that you're from, not just in a pride sense, but just I guess seeing another place through the eyes of a person who doesn't live there, I guess. Something like that.
I think that's very right. Yeah, it gives you new ways of seeing.
You mentioned when you first came to France. When was that?
I studied abroad my summer after junior year of college, so that was the year 2000.
Okay. I have a suspicion that your choice of last meal is tied to this place and possibly your father. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I just, I grew up with a man from Texas. My father, we had bacon and eggs for breakfast many mornings, and money was not always in surplus, but my father, when we were having a nice meal, he was a guy who would like to have a steak. But what always really struck me, and now that I'm a dad myself, I think about this all the time. My dad, no matter how costly that would be, always, if he was having steak, we were having steak too. And there's a kind of example in that I always found very beautiful. My father was he's still there. He's still with us. He's the most generous man I've known. So if my brother grew out of his shoes and had to get new shoes, he took us both to get new shoes, but there wasn't really money for 2 pairs of shoes. And so it just always struck me that, steak was something that it meant that there was, he had a new student he taught, he had students come to the house and he taught them. He worked for himself. And if there was a new student or something and we were out at a restaurant, which wasn't always the case, and he was ordering steak, that was also a way that I knew that like things were going well at that moment in our lives too, So
that's really
there's
interesting.
a kind of association with that too. It was like a barometer,
it's
even
a marker,
of,
Well, I hope this is a marker for you because this is my gift to you this evening. Your last meal.
Oh wow, that's wow, beautiful. What's the cut here? Is filet mignon?
It's a filet mignon. What we refer
that was
to
also
as,
his favorite.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's typically filet mignon. When you go to order filet mignon here, they give you pork, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
They have the same term. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So filet de boeuf.
Beautiful.
Yep. And do you want to try it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's try it, and then we can talk a little bit more about your dad.
I almost don't want to.
Yeah. Okay. So it's got a pork rind around it. That's just to sort of keep.
Where's your butcher?
This one actually is not my butcher because I got this yesterday, and of course it was public holiday, so I went down to the third.
It's beautiful though. Oh, that's looking beautiful.
Oh, look at that! I actually nailed the inside.
What's your secret to your peppercorn sauce?
There's no real secret. I do it just like most people do, I think. So green peppercorns. I mean, the secret to it is always a good stock. And so making a stock that has gelatin is really important. So, cooking bones down really slowly over time.
You made your stock.
And that converts the collagen into gelatin. And then that's a really good base for a stock. And then with this one, we just added some, I think we went with creme fraiche. Yeah, creme fraiche instead of cream. Green peppercorns, shallots, a bit of garlic. It's a pretty simple sauce, actually. It's got a bit of kick to it. I tried it. Is it okay?
It's delicious.
Can I try a bit, actually?
Please, yeah.
Can you cut a piece off one?
Oh, my God. Your sauce is incredible, man.
I'm glad you like it. Just pop it straight there. Thanks.
Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to try this, see how it went.
It's fantastic.
À point?
Exactly.
À point.
No, but the peppercorn sauce is better than in most of these French brasserie.
Fuck yeah, man.
And it's definitely got that kick.
Awesome. That's cool. Good to know.
You're making your own stock.
Yeah. Always. Every place I go in the world, we make our own stock. If we're going to be there for
really?
a month, about a month, usually it's chicken. It's easy to do. But always make a stock. We cook it down and we put it into ice cube trays, chuck it in the freezer, and then you can always just put it in the pan, bring it back to life. Yeah,
that's like chef knowledge. I for most of my 20s, I dated a girl who was a chef, and she had so much stuff in the freezer like this. Yeah,
amazing. I also do onions, like caramelized onions, because you can get like a bag of 4 kilos of onions, and then once you caramelize them, they come down to a little tiny, they fit in a little plastic bag, and you can just chuck those in the freezer, put them on burgers, anything. They don't take up much room. They're incredible. Do you want some wine?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That is not just for the camera. That is a fantastic sauce. Wait, how did you
I didn't know you were going to do a one for the camera. Okay, let me tell you about this wine before we There's a reason I chose this. Bordeaux, it's going to pair really great with this meal. But I was trying to get something that I felt represented you, right? And this Right Bank Saint-Emilion is from 2016, so it's almost 10 years old. And I think it lives 2 separate lives. You can drink it fresh and it's fantastic, or you can wait 10 years and it just completely becomes a new person and has a different identity. And so this wine, this wine pairs with you. Let's
that's true. Wait 10 years, I'm a different person.
That's exactly right.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hope it doesn't suck now.
No,
now that I've given it that preamble.
I love Saint-Emilion.
Yeah.
I'm
gonna go there next week.
Would you
just put it
in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're familiar with the region.
I'm familiar. I mean, I haven't been out to the wineries yet, but I've been down to Bordeaux, but I haven't been out to the. But I'm going to do that next week. Looking forward to it.
I've never been. I'm jealous. You'll have to tell me how it is.
It will be me not knowing what the fuck I'm talking about.
Cheers.
And drinking a lot of wine. Cheers. Which is pretty much just like the rest of my life. So
that is very good. Delicious.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I like it. Apparently 2016 is a good year. That's what they're going for me.
How did you become such a gourmet?
I'm not sure whether I'm a gourmet or a gourmand. I don't know. I mean, food, I think I have way more knowledge in than wine. I do really appreciate wine, but I'm also a cheap drunk. Like all of my favorite wines are like the cheapest wines. So I don't think I'm particularly highbrow with my wine. But
with your cooking too.
Cooking, yeah, I really love cooking. Look, it's just always been a connection point for me to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just how can I make this dish better, but how can I make this dish that could be a gift for someone? And I think it's just food is something that just brings us together. And it's just something that I've been okay at, I guess, for enough time that I like cooking for people. And it also has a sense of community about it, right? And, you're sitting down with a large group of people, eating, drinking, and it's the best way to connect, I think.
It is. Yeah, I've never myself been, like the type of cook that would but maybe I will try this, that would just like buy a sack of onions and caramelize them all and throw them in the freezer. But, I'm a dad and I've been making meals for my kids, and the older they get, the more they can try different things. And like feeding my kids actually is something that I didn't expect. I thought it would be more of a chore, and it can be a chore. I don't want to glamorize, housework necessarily and like romanticize it and say that it's never like something I don't want to do. But it has actually been something that like I didn't foresee. It wasn't something that wasn't something that my dad did. He was never in the kitchen, but like feeding my own kids and going to the market as we were talking about earlier and doing everything from picking the produce to then trying to cajole them into actually eating the produce, but preparing their food and that time of serving them at the table has been something that I didn't anticipate in fatherhood, but has been one of the things that I very much do.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, get a lot of satisfaction out of. And my daughter has just become old enough that she also, for the past year or more, 2-3 years, has done some cooking in the kitchen and likes it and has gotten good at it. And
how old is she?
And I'm so proud of her. She's 11.
That's fantastic.
But she does her carbonara and she's got her dishes that she does. And and she's very meticulous about it. And it's that kind of stepping back and seeing that your kid. Food is like a very like impressive way of sharing, but it's not just something to give. Like receiving is also very important, and receiving from your child a meal for me was also kind of like a moment that marked some kind of turning. You know what I mean?
Incredible, yeah. Have you heard of this expression, Madeleine de Proust?
Oh, of course.
Oh, you have?
Of course.
Interesting. I only learned about it yesterday. Seriously.
Really?
Yeah. I was walking up the road here on Rue de Pic, and I ran into like a friend of mine who owns a cafe just around the corner.
Street.
Yeah. And I was telling him about last meal because he doesn't know what I do. Like I come here all the time. He's like, what do you do? Like, why are you here? And I told him about last meal. And he's like, Madeleine de Proust. And I was like, okay, what is that? And for anyone who doesn't know, Madeleine de Proust is the idea that a flavor or a smell or even an object could evoke a positive childhood memory. And it comes from Marcel Proust, the writer, who used to have this experience with madeleines, which are these small, like pastry type things.
They're like a little, like a kind of gâteau, like a little small cake.
Are they orange flavor?
Yellowish orange, yeah.
What's the, because I don't really eat sweets.
It's just They don't have to be flavored at all.
Right.
It's just essentially like a kind of cake in a specific shape.
Right. Okay.
And the character, who's very much autobiographically based on Proust, is a child, and he comes and visits his aunt, and he dips a Madeleine in his tea, and the mixture of the cake and the tea brings him back to his childhood reminiscences that then sent him off for 4,000 pages.
Amazing.
So we got 4,000 pages to read from this kind of moment when he's transported back to childhood. But that was an amazing reading experience for me because I was the first time I lived in France. I had moved. I studied abroad before my senior year of college, and then I returned to university, and I started dating a French exchange student who was my French TA when I was back at Georgetown. And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do after college, and she got me a job teaching English in the north of France, in Lille, on the border, like just across from England. And by the time that I came to take my job, we had already broken up. But I came and I spent a year there, and it was this amazing experience in my life because I was so crushingly lonely, and I didn't have the crutch of technology in the way that we have now. These were the days where I checked my email twice a week or something like that.
Like you went to an internet cafe.
I went to a site. I didn't even get Wi-Fi in my apartment that year because it was not considered like you had to have Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I just went to the cyber cafe down the street. And I spent a lot of time just like reading Proust in cafes, and that was actually an extraordinary experience. And so like your evocation of Proust's Madeleine is also a kind of, that name just evokes for me these like rainy Sundays when all of the several British people that I knew in town basically were busy or something, and I was sitting in a cafe reading Proust. That also the transportation device transports.
Yeah, I was going to say, so your Madeleine de Proust is Madeleine de
reading Proust.
I'm not sure that kind of inception is permitted. I think you need to. My question was going to be, do you have a Madeleine de Proust
with a flavor?
Yeah, well, no, as it is, it doesn't need to be a flavor. And I guess, your time in Lille qualifies, but I'm looking for something that's more of a childhood memory, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just certain things, I've been coming back and forth and living away for a long time, but my mother, she's a native Californian. So what that means is like she's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from Southern California, like who didn't think very hard about her ethnic origins beyond that, because that she's a boomer. These were the years where it's just like, I don't have an ethnicity. I'm just like I'm from California. I'm American. So. But she, next door to her, was a Mexican family, and the mother of that family taught my mother her recipe for like pico de gallo sauce. It was very beautiful, very flavorful, and just like my favorite thing to eat ever that's home is like the salsa that my mother always made. It's like we have chips and we have this kind of very spicy salsa, tomato, garlic, cilantro,
amazing,
a bit of onion, very simple, very delicious. And for me, and what's been so nice is, I've lived away for a long time, but whenever I come home at any time, there's always that salsa like immediately on the table. She made it in advance, and it's just like that flavor. I'm a child again, but it's also this kind of continuity. Like it's one of the few things that actually like is unbroken from my earliest food memories to this day. So it's like that's home, and there's no other kind of salsa that I've ever had that's exactly the same. So even like when like my brother or a girlfriend has made it, it's not the same. It can be delicious, but it's not the same. So there's that for me.
How much do you think context plays into that?
I don't know if I would find it the same in the future if it weren't coming in the context of home. I really don't know. I mean, we'll see. I have the recipe, so
you do,
and my brother knows. So maybe one day we'll make it in the future, and that'll be the real test.
Yeah, you should try that.
Yeah.
Speaking
I don't want to rush those days. That means that there's no home to go to. So
you don't want to find out that doesn't work, even with the recipe.
Yeah.
Speaking of context, if you were able to decide on the context of your last meal, and that means, where you would have it, with whom you would have it, the duration, have you thought much about that?
It's very difficult. I have tried to think about that in the context of our conversation, and it's very difficult to imagine your own mortality. I've been reading a biography of James Baldwin, who's a writer, also transatlantic commuter, who very important to me as a reader, and as a kind of model of somebody I think lived a kind of vocation on the page, and a vocation as it pertains to using language in a way that ennobles us all who come in contact with it, and just somebody that I think ennobled people that were in his presence. A beautiful soul. Just reading about how he died and how it was really, he had cancer and he died in the south of France in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, in the home he lived in for the last 17 years of his life. And it really snuck up on him, and it's really difficult to realize I'm actually dying here, And he was surrounded by his brother and two of his closest lifelong friends who just held his hand as he died. And at that point, he couldn't even really eat anymore. So it just happens that I was thinking about in the context of our conversation and in the context of this book that I just read this today. And I really don't know what my mind would be on and what the meal would be on and who I'd want to share it with. But I imagine that at this stage in my life, I would very much want to be with my brother, with my children, there would be friends, and I imagine that some of the friends I'd want to be with wouldn't be there. And there would be maybe some people that would be there that it would surprise me. I'd be ever so grateful that they were there. But it's one of those things where it's very difficult to imagine, or to think that you could know what would be the thing that you needed or what would be best.
Yeah. Surrounding yourself with so many people that are that important to you in your life currently, what do you think the kinds of conversations you'd be having would sound like?
I imagine if you're dying young or younger than people expect you to, that you'd be doing a lot of consoling the people around you. If you're dying before your parents die, I imagine that would be, your role would be to bring them some type of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, man. I mean, this is actually something that I'm not very versed with. I know in the abstract, I would like to have your steak au poivre, because that's just about everything that I want out of a last meal, for sure.
Okay, yeah.
And I wouldn't.
That's the kind of conversation you'd be having with your family. You're like, where's Tom's steak au poivre?
If I didn't
this is bullshit.
Yeah. If I didn't have the kind of incapacitating, final stages that made eating unpleasurable, then I would want to go to town, and I would very much want to be drinking. But
absolutely.
I imagine you wouldn't want to be drinking in such a way that you would lose lucidity, because I think that would be really what you would want to hold on to.
That's an interesting comment. Whether you would want to hold on to lucidity towards the end, because a lot of people, when they end their own lives, or sometimes packed full of painkillers, and sometimes that's necessary.
See, that is a nightmarish scenario to me, and the one I wanted to be lucid, and I want to be the nightmarish kind of. I didn't see her death, but I saw her shortly before she died. The nightmarish way is how my grandmother's last decade was, which was dementia, and a kind of polar opposite of lucidity that I think is a worse punishment than you would ever choose for your worst enemy. A kind of fear and not knowing you're surrounded by loved ones, not recognizing your daughter's loving face when she's right in front of you. this is terrifying. So I would certainly not like inebriate myself in a way to escape the kind of lucid awareness of what's happening.
I think that's a fair call. You and I are similar ages. Do you ever think, like, if you were to die tomorrow for some reason, like, for instance, I've got someone outside in the hall about to kill you just for this show.
You got on Blue Sky and like invited someone over?
Why Blue Sky?
Blue Sky is the nastiest. That's where all the vitriol really is.
Really? Yeah. That's where you hire assassins?
Yeah.
Okay. No. But I just mean, if you were to simulate at least that this was literally your last meal, like, how would you feel about your life up until this point? Do you think that you've made a significant effect on the world that you're satisfied with? Like, obviously you could do more the longer you lived, but like, how would you feel about it if this was actually it?
Two different things. As a human being, as a man, as a son, as a brother, as a father, boyfriend, husband, lover, different phases of my life, friend, I feel like I've lived a full life. I've been very lucky. I've felt the full spectrum of human emotions. I've loved and honored my parents. I've loved some women and been loved back. I've brought children to this world who I love, and they know me and they know my parents and they know my world. And I've left a couple of books where I think that they would have a lasting impression of some of the things I've learned and maybe some of the mistakes I've made, but the way I've started to see things. And I've had a full life. I've learned what it feels like to overcome some obstacles. I've learned that some successes you get are no panacea. There's no permanent victory. So I've had a full life. But if I were to die right now, I'd feel very, I'd feel that there's still so much more that I want to do. And so I would feel that it was cut short, but I would be grateful that I really did actually fully experience like the human experience. I've had the chance to be in different parts of the world and kind of experience, even for short periods of time, to experience its like kind of boundless splendor, and so I would not feel sorry for myself, but I would feel that there was a lot more that I wanted to do, and where I granted more time, I would come back with a kind of, I think, that thing that happens when people have a near-death experience where they realize that they want to make sure that they don't waste their time because no one knows how much they've actually got, Do
you think that want ever really leaves us? Like, I mean, do you think there'd ever be a point in your life?
I don't think so. Yeah. Because my father is turning 88 this summer, and he's got plans. He's got things he still wants to achieve, and of course he's aware that there's more time behind him than in front of him. But he's really got his things he wants to still accomplish, things he wants to say, things he wants to, things he wants to do.
Maybe that's what makes people 88.
I think so. I think that I've been in France long enough to see some people, even who didn't want to, structurally have to retire when they're 59, 60, 61. And, a lot of Americans say the French are very lucky because these are people that have a pension. They're not actually like in the situation like, I know many people in America who couldn't do that. They must work. And you can say that is not a nice situation to be in, and I have a lot of sympathy to that. But I don't necessarily envy the people that stopped working at 59. Most of them really do seem to be kind of flailing in some ways, like moving from vacation to vacation, or, they've got their hobbies or whatever. But the thing that keeps you, I think, and I don't want to say, I want to specify, if you have a grueling, terrible, physically demanding job, I get that's very different. But I'm talking about people who are kind of middle class, upper middle class, had, not physically taxing jobs, but but retired at 59 because that's a thing that happens in France. With enough pension that you don't have to ever work, you can take your vacations, but you kind of are now just spinning your wheels. And these are people that don't feel like, they don't always have, in my estimation, admittedly from the outside, the kind of thing that you see when you see an 85-year-old engrossed in his or her work, having a mission. I remember so vividly when I was just back from France after the first year living here in my early 20s. I was a paralegal at a law firm in New York, and the law firm was one of these big corporate firms, Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom. You may have heard about them recently because they preemptively capitulated to the Trump administration, didn't cover themselves with glory there. Right. But they're one of the big, huge law firms. And Joseph Flom was like 90, and every day he was sitting at his desk. And he didn't have work. He was a partner, but he wasn't the guy that was keeping the lights on in the building anymore. But being in the building he was sharp and he was with it, and he built this huge firm, and he came into the office and it meant something. And
and in that case, it's sort of like part of his identity as well, right? It's like he's the man.
You got to stay active, I think. I think it would be a curse to make so much money that I could stop working now or in the next 10, even 20 years. I wouldn't want that. Some successes are catastrophic. I've seen people get a windfall and come undone. I've seen some people that I care very much about. There are failures that are obviously, that everybody knows are catastrophes, but there are successes that really destabilize as well.
There was a study done many years ago, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it was trying to record the self-reported subjective well-being of people who had either had a permanent disability or had won the lottery.
Yes, the lottery's worse.
The lottery, but basically, for a short period, the lottery winners are really happy, and then they just return to their baseline.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they even go below the baseline.
Sometimes they go below the baseline because something catastrophic happened, as you're describing.
No, or everybody's asking them for something, or they have no more goals. I think incremental success, like a trajectory, is very satisfying. Like improving over the course of time. Like this stage is better than 5 years ago, and that was better than 5 years ago, is actually the ideal way that we're built, I think.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
It's versus stagnation, right?
Yes. And you can stagnate at a high level.
Yeah.
Stagnation is not always low, but it's still a stagnation, and we adapt to everything. We adapt to, it's not the case that like people like who were enslaved never left. We adapt to, the human psyche is incredible and adapts to everything, and it makes a hell out of heaven and a heaven out of hell if it is so motivated. But I think incremental kind of like short-term and long-term planning, goals that are like ambitious but can from time to time be attained, that's a good life.
Yeah, and I think we notice that in other people's behaviors as well, and I think people who seem to be on the up are often highly revered more than somebody who is stagnant but above them in achievement.
That's very.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, everybody loves to see somebody who's blowing up, who's having a breakthrough.
That's right.
We love that.
We do. Yeah,
I love that narratively. Of course. Somebody like having a come up, changing their position. We love change. We need to see change. Stagnation is very discomforting.
Talking about change, was there a turning point in your life when you were younger or coming up that you really recognized as prolific, as the moment that you really were set on the current path that you're on?
That's I want to not go. I don't know what path I'm on, but I feel very grateful that I've been able to take care of my family through words and ideas. I think that's a very fortunate thing that happened for me because it's what I wanted to do, is what I care about, and some other things that I toyed with doing, I wasn't that good at. So
what were they?
when you're young, you read like Liar's Poker, or you see the movie Wall Street, and you're like, I'm going to be an investment banker.
Oh, yeah.
But some people can do it, and I've got some friends who did well at that, but I couldn't do that. And I couldn't do corporate law. That's why I left. I didn't go to law school after my stint at as a paralegal at that firm, which some of my friends did, and they had a nice trajectory after that for them. But I quickly became clear to me that what I need to do things that I really am really invested in, and to be invested in something, I also have to see that I can be good at it. So writing really was that sweet spot for me. Reading and writing, because I don't think that there's such thing as writing. I think when you're a writer, you're really a reader first and foremost. The primary thing is that you read words, and engage.
You're doing a lot of that now, aren't you?
With texts, yeah. And so. The first moment, I got very lucky a couple times, and there's kind of peaks and valleys. But the first moment where it became possible was that I was very lucky, and I was at NYU doing my master's, and I suddenly realized there that I was like on a fellowship. I would never have been able to afford the tuition. But I was lucky I got a fellowship. And then when I was there, it became apparent to me that I was never going to be able to just start once I understood how publishing magazine writing works and how living in New York City works. I was never going to be able to spend a few years in my 20s like freelancing and making a go at being a writer. So I got in my mind this idea after my first semester that the only way that I could make being a writer work was I had to leave the program with a book deal. And I'd never written or published anything. And I had the stroke of fortune to be taught by a woman named Katie Royfey, who was, 10 or 12 years older than me and already a very established writer. And she took me under her wing. She took a liking to me in her class, which she didn't have to do. And one assignment was an op-ed, write an op-ed for class. And so I wrote that op-ed. I was really invested in my time at school. And she said, well, that's a pretty good op-ed. I think that could actually be published. And I said, no, what? And, she put me in touch with her editor at the New York Times, and they took it very seriously. And I was astonished that they were taking just like something I wrote for class seriously. And it ended up, not running there, but I just went and sent it to the Washington Post, and they said, we'll take it. And they ran it, and it became my first book. And I suddenly she introduced me to her agent, and I was I'd never written anything. I was taking my idea out, and I dropped out of school for 6 months. I worked on a book proposal, and I had a book deal that supported me for the next, 5 years, actually, coming out of school with that, which was the only way that I could make my career work. And it actually worked. And the only reason why it worked is because I was so naive about how difficult and how unlikely that would have been.
Yeah.
That it actually, I approached it as though it was possible because I didn't know how unlikely. If I had known what the chances were of getting a book deal that way, I think I would have actually been crippled, and I would have I wouldn't have just gone with the idea that felt right to me. I would have been overthinking it or something.
Yeah.
And then all my other friends who were in a position to start more slowly, they started freelancing, and they gradually started getting hired at magazines. And then by the time that I had worked through that advance, I was trying to figure out what the next project was. I didn't have the groundwork under me to become a magazine writer. So I had to reinvent myself. I was in Paris now. I was married. I had to reinvent, how do I support myself in Paris? I've now blown through. The next book didn't come as quickly as I assumed it would. How do I make myself into a freelance writer? So I had to kind of learn again. And it took some years, some lean years, because it's not just that you have a book that you can just go to the New Yorker and say, I'll take, a contract, please. You still have to, in some ways it's easier to publish a book than it is to write a piece for the New York Times Magazine or the New Yorker. So I had to start pitching, and I had to start I had to establish a point of view, and I was lucky to be here, and I was an American here. And so I started to write about things that I saw here, or America glimpsed from this angle where I was, that luckily for me, I wasn't just another guy in Brooklyn. So I was one of the few people here trying to write about some things, and I gradually, again, started again, and there was a moment where I I pitched a profile of Majid Nawaz to the New York Times Magazine. I didn't know anyone there, and they took the profile, and it was just taking such a long time. And at some point they said, would you like to profile this Black writer in New York that you'd probably like a lot, who I did, John Edgar Wideman, like legendary figure. And I flew to New York, and I wrote that thing, and I talked to him, and I wrote that like my life depended on it. Not because I thought I'm going to get a job, but just like that's how I was at that stage attacking every freelance assignment. And when I filed that piece, which actually ended up coming out before the Nawaz profile, I remember this day because this was like I already had a daughter at this point. Jake Silverstein at the Times Magazine emailed me and said, like, would you like to come on contract? And I just like, I came downstairs and I was like, I can finally, like, I'm not living like hand to mouth. I can finally, like, plan months in advance. Like for the first time I'm like in my 30s at this point, but like I had this early success with the book that kind of gave me a false understanding of how easy it would be to earn a living as a writer. Then I had to kind of start again after some of my friends were already like fully established. And then I got that kind of like magazine work like going a little bit older. But then I had another book coming. And then so that was like when I didn't think I've made it, but I thought I'm fully able to support my family and I'm like not precarious for the first time in a long time. And so that was a real moment. And then I got a couple of fellowships and some things and things started to escalate and move better.
Yeah, the snowballs.
But that was, I remember coming down the stairs and just being like, just a sense of relief that I think I actually think it's really important to feel some of these things. I don't know what I would feel like if I never knew like money worries, which I it's no one's fault if no one's responsible for how they're born. I have a lot of friends who have never had to ever worry if there would be money there. But in some ways, I think this is how I was able to attack certain pieces of writing that allowed me to move forward, because I was attacking it not just from a kind of like sense that I have to do this job, but it's not just work. It was like, this is my life is at stake. And,
oh God, that reminds me of like, I remember reading Hemingway when he talks about like writing best when you're hungry. Because he had to write
An Immovable Feast.
Yeah.
He's very, very eloquent on this, and I always was struck by that. And, I think about this a lot. I think that sometimes there have been times in my own like working life where I have thought that, the way that I was up at 5 a.m, when that fee that was coming for this essay was the difference between, rent or not rent, produced a different level of kind of focus. And sometimes I do miss that. And I'm not like, certainly not able to retire now, but that kind of, and I'm not saying I want that back.
No,
I don't want that back.
Yeah.
But it does become, there is a kind of, you can get more lax in certain situations where you know that the stakes aren't sky high.
Yeah, you get a bit too comfortable.
But I think books should be written in circumstances where you have to write this book. And, sometimes the kind of intellectual engagement you have with the subject can be that urgent. But it's hard to be that urgent when you've also got the kind of creature comforts that come with having like a fully comfortable, like a job that you're getting paid like a very good wage to do. I keep coming back to this biography of Baldwin because a writer as great as James Baldwin really struggled with this. After he really like made it became harder to do the kind of work that he produced when he was trying to make it, And of course he was at a level of real celebrity and fame, but like real windfalls, and the work suffered.
So, I mean, one of the things that I actually wanted to talk to you about was how you see the lessons that you learned from the past, let's call it, right? And so, and it could be in this sense that we're talking about, when you're hungry, when you have no money, or when you're really relying on things, it sort of forces you into a different way of a different work ethic or a different modus operandi, whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
But I often also think about it in the context of, thank you, by the way. I'd been toying with the idea recently of every time I have a long-term relationship, not that I've had that many, but every long-term relationship that has ended, I never regret them because I think I learned something from them. Maybe about myself, maybe about what I want, maybe about other people, whatever it is. I still take something away. But then lately I've been thinking, could I have perhaps learned just as much in the first 3 years and I didn't need to go to 5?
That's for sure. I agree with you 100% on that. A couple of times I stayed too long at the party.
Yeah, you stayed too long, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, but when do you know when is the right, like when you've learned everything? You don't know when you're in the moment. And it reminds me of what you were saying about, missing that feeling of being hungry for work in a way that your life depends on it. It's a lesson or a knowledge that you've learned in the past that you feel like you don't necessarily need to be in that position, but you also don't want to get too far away from it.
Yeah.
And be too comfortable. Do you think there's an optimal way we can know when we've learned our lesson as human beings?
Well, I do think that the older you get, the more you realize that things you thought were once in a lifetime occurrences are actually more common. You start to recognize patterns and you start to suss people out better and you start to know what's worth your time and what's not. That's what one of the most satisfying things of middle age really is. And then, I think it gets better even in old age if you keep your faculties, is that you that's what we mean by wisdom. You have like a lot of things to compare situations to. And so I think it gets easier to know. The older you get, I think it becomes easier to know when it's time to leave or when the show is over or whatever cliche I'll reach for next. But I think that there's ways that we can learn these things. And my father always tried to impress this on me, that you don't have to live every experience if you read widely and if you actually think about what other people have lived through and incorporate it into your own. And this is true, but it's very hard to do. I read a lot of things, but I didn't actually apply all of what I read in ways that in retrospect I realize I could have or should have. But that's the purpose of other people's examples and lives. And like one of the real purposes, not the only purpose, but one of the great purposes of literature is, living vicariously.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do certain things.
Learning vicarious lessons, I guess.
Yeah.
What's a lesson that, had you learnt it earlier, would have changed your life for the better, do you think?
On a very basic level, I had every opportunity and was actually begged and encouraged by my parents and teachers for my whole life to just actually learn French well. And I always said that it wasn't relevant to me when I was just a kid in New Jersey. And my God, if I could go back, I would just throw myself into 6th grade French, It would have really been helpful. There are many things. My dad my dad can box, and was really good with his hands, and he wanted to, really properly teach me how to box, and I had to learn, through trial and error how to get through a fight, and it would have been much better, in retrospect, to do a lot of these things, the piano. There's so many things that I wish I could live again, and I see my daughter taking piano lessons, and I just gave up on the piano, and I can't for the life of me understand why I would do that, because I could be enjoying that kind of that skill, that ability to create music but you don't know the thing that's so important. And I see this really as a parent, but it's hard to do because I remember I'm young enough to remember the child's position on it too. But the parent kind of has to do this delicate thing where you force the child to do some things that they don't want to do because they only become pleasurable once you can do them well enough. But it's hard to get to the level. Yeah. But when you can do them, they can be some of the most deeply satisfying things you can ever do in your life. And one of the things that I did hang with that my dad pushed me to do, which was agony at first, was get to that level at chess where it became very pleasurable. And so I didn't stay with the piano, but chess was terrible. My dad would always beat me, and I didn't like. It was hard to want to sit down and play with him. But then at some point, did it enough, and at some point I beat him. And then you have that kind of competence that makes the task deeply gratifying. But you can never even know that the game is interesting until you see how it works. And so I think that's like such a thing that relates to this idea that youth is wasted on the young. There's so many things that you don't know, but all of the like ideas of regret that you're kind of getting at with this question go back to like things that I would want to apply myself to much more diligently were I to be able to have a second go at it, but I didn't know at the time.
What if I asked you if there was a year in your life that you could repeat, but you don't get to go back with the knowledge that you have now? In fact, you just watch it like a movie. You experience it, but you don't go back with all the information that you've cultivated since then. It's just literally pressing play on something. You can't change anything either, so you have no autonomy virtually.
It's there. I feel like this question makes me feel kind of lucky because there's more than 1 year that I would like to go back to, and it wouldn't be out of a sense of regret. It was very meaningful. But if I just pick one, I think that for someone like me, and it really is a kind of an American thing. My freshman year at college, going to all-American college, like with a campus and living away from home on campus and making a few of the best friendships of my entire life and encountering Dostoevsky for the first time and just, that encounter alone, but like looking at certain paintings in my art history class and just I think that's the first time I ever had tasted Thai food. I was so provincial when I arrived at this campus, and Washington, D.C. was this big, huge town to me, even though afterwards, once I moved to New York, then that became a small town. But for me, it was, I had flavors I'd never tasted. Everything was new. This was a discovery year. All of college was, but freshman year, the difference between the year before, I would live that again, and I think it was the most intense kind of sense of, possibility was opening up, and it sounds kind of, I don't know, it sounds mawkish or something, but really reading Dostoevsky for the first time, I don't think that I can ever tap into that level of intellectual astonishment and aesthetic bliss. And, there's somebody that thinks this way. I can't believe it. And he lived over 100 years ago in Russia. This, it was.
And you said it perfectly. It's the first time I encountered Dostoevsky, because that's what people do. They encounter him.
Yeah, it was an encounter. Everything was an encounter. But it's the first time I had, sushi. It was crazy. It was like everything was an encounter.
Yeah. But it's interesting because the time that you're reflecting upon is a time where you are encountering completely new experiences, right? Mm-hmm. But in your day-to-day life now, do you optimize for new experiences? I mean, most of us don't. Well, increasingly less and less.
Increasingly less, right?
And do you think that's just because we've become set in our ways, or do you think it's because we've experienced enough to know what we like more? Or is it just, hey, we're busy now?
Yes, that's the sadness of, and that's part of what it means to grow up, right? Is to have obligations, and your self-discovery doesn't always take precedence, or necessarily shouldn't take precedence over somebody else's emerging kind of experiences in the world that you're guiding. But I actually do think I managed to keep quite a lot of, I think one of the, writing is precarious, and a lot of people don't value it in our culture, for sure. The life of the mind or the life of, putting thoughts to paper is less valued than it had been. But I still think you're very lucky, because even if it doesn't give you the security or the huge paychecks that some other industries do, you get a lot of different experiences. You get a lot of autonomy, self-direction, travel if you want it that way. The type of writing I do, which mixes, my own stuff, but I also write, I profile people. So sometimes I travel, I meet very interesting and even quite accomplished people, and I get to just ask them questions. I'm lucky to meet, you meet new people, you go give a talk, you travel, you have some kind of possibilities of new friendships. I met you recently, that's nice. I'm not in a rut where I know that tomorrow will always be like the day before. So there's the possibility of that. But then as you do get older, it's just impossible that you just can't have that first time I heard Jay-Z, first time I encountered Dostoevsky over and over again. It's just that more time passes and many people sound like weaker versions of Jay-Z.
That's going to be the headline for this whole...
But, I just the other day, I'm not a great player. My sport was basketball. I did play basketball pretty well when I was younger, but I'm a massive tennis fan. And Roland Garros, the French Open just wrapped up. And, I grew up, for the past 2 decades, we were lucky. We watched Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, and Novak Djokovic, the golden age of tennis. And Nadal was my guy, Spanish tennis. And, it felt like I'll never hear that. There will never be another Jay-Z or something like that. But man, I just watched the men's final. I don't know if you caught this on Sunday. Carlos Alcaraz. There's every now and then, even though I've watched a lot of, decades of seeing great tennis, I just saw a tennis match that I think is one of the greatest tennis matches like in history.
Yeah, it was one
Sunday.
Of the longest, wasn't it? Yeah.
And it might have been the greatest comeback in a finals ever. And it was just phenomenal. And, so there still is that kind of, but it's harder to have those experiences of seeing Rafael Nadal play for the first time or something like that,
But is that just your experience? Okay, like, do you romanticize the nostalgia of your youth? Do we all?
We do. We all do. But sometimes your youth is also coinciding with a great moment.
With objective...
They've done studies on this. Everybody thinks that the music they heard when they were like in their teens and 20s is... So that's why the boomers think the 60s is the best.
Yeah.
I am predestined to believe that 90s era hip-hop is the best.
I like 90s hip-hop. We're about the same age, right? But when I was in my, I guess, teens... I was a guitarist and I was self-taught largely. So I used to teach myself how to play, and the music that I was listening to at that point was like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, The Doors. That was what I liked listening to, and a bit of like Nirvana and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
But predominantly it was like 70s music. And at the time,
with some soul. With some soul in it, Some soul in it,
And at the time, I remember thinking that I listened to old music because I was like, this is the 70s.
I know. In the 90s, you thought the 70s was so old.
And now that would be like somebody listening to Britney Spears.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're deep in the 21st century now.
That's exactly right.
This is crazy because I still think the 90s is not that long ago.
No, me too. I know. And that's
crazy.
It's like 30 years ago.
It's like really 30 years. Like they're doing stuff like, this is the 30th anniversary of this Wu-Tang song.
I know. Terrifying.
It's really terrifying.
I think next year will be the 30th anniversary of Fuji's The Score.
That's crazy because that was because I'm from New Jersey, and they were like the biggest rap group that ever came out of New Jersey, and that was huge for us because they were from not even far from where I'm from, Irvington and Newark.
All of them, or was it just Lauryn Hill?
Lauryn Hill was from Irvington, I want to say. Wyclef, they were from Irvington.
Yeah, right.
And there were a lot of kids in my school.
But Praswell was from Brooklyn, right?
Pras was from Brooklyn, right? And yeah, that's right.
I don't actually know that.
He's got a crazy...
I'm just throwing shade on Pras.
I think...
Because...
There's something different about Pras. He's a cousin of Wyclef or something.
You can say that again.
Yeah, he's going to jail for a Chinese agent or something crazy like that.
Right. Yeah. There's some. He was never as good as the rest of them.
The score is a phenomenal album, and the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is just like
I just felt
high watermark.
Like the reason I just thought Praswell, like whatever, he was always just in the background saying the same thing Wyclef just said.
The thing is, when I broke up with this chef I dated for most of my 20s, I was in this phase of being single in my 20s in Brooklyn. I was sitting next to like a very beautiful girl, and we struck up a conversation at a burger joint in Brooklyn, and we started dating. And there were two guys that were texting her and trying to date her for like the duration of the 10 months, and one was Praz, and the other was like a guy who just won an NBA championship, who I won't name. And like those were the guys that were always like texting.
Really?
Yeah, and it was the weirdest scenario because I'd never dated somebody like that. I just thought like I had discovered this like beautiful like local girl, and it's like I found this diamond in the rough.
Yeah,
and
her like, phone dings, and it's like Flavor Flav.
Yeah, and it's like she's just like some like actually like she's like a VJ from India. And she was like
a VJ from India.
Yeah, she was very much not like somebody I had just discovered at a burger joint.
That's fucking hilarious.
But she was amazing, and we had this like amazingly sweet. She was like much more in that world than I was. But she was like, I really love your middle class values. It's like so reassuring and wholesome.
Yeah. I love your middle class values as well, Thomas.
And I was like, is that Praz texting you? The relationship didn't last, but she was great. She was cool.
Praz skipped her up. Your name, by the way, I just wanted to quickly hint at. Is it in reference to the old poet Thomas Chatterton? It is.
Mm-hmm.
So your parents named you after, but wasn't that like in Chaucer's time or something?
He was a proto-romantic in the 1700s. I don't have at the tip of my tongue the year he died, but he was proto-romantic poet from Bristol, Thomas Chatterton, who was a kind of extraordinary boy. It was Wordsworth who called him. He called him the marvelous boy in his monody on Chatterton. And he was a kind of emblem of neglected talent for like the Romantics, like Shelley and all of these like poets that rose to greater acclaim than he did. But even like Pete Doherty and the Baby Shambles like found him inspirational, and he's like this painting of him that hangs in the Tate is actually the cover of the Baby Shambles' first album.
Oh, cool.
Juxtaposed with Kate Moss. With Kate Moss's backside, I believe. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of... my father grew up never having a father. Poor black boy from the segregated South before civil rights. And at some point became aware of Chatterton, who was a fatherless white boy in Bristol, whose father died, and his family was plunged into poverty. And he had real talent as a poet, and he became famous for these kind of poems that he was doing in a kind of, he said he found poems in St. Mary Radcliffe Church across the street from where he lived, and they were made to look very old, but they were actually poems that he wrote, and passed off as like older poems that he had found. And then he was accused later with his own work of having plagiarized. But after he died, it was clear that he actually was writing his own poems and had quite a lot of talent. But he died in Hoxton, in Shoreditch, in this kind of like in this moment that has been like memorialized in the painting in the Tate, the death of Chatterton. Drinking arsenic, and the legend was that he killed himself in despair because he couldn't make it as a poet, and he wanted to be a political journalist. But then the beauty of the internet, to bring the conversation full circle, is that 10 years ago, I get an email from Bristol, and this very lovely woman, Madge Dresser, is saying that she's part of the Thomas Chatterton Society, and they had just been like Googling something and stumbled across me, and they were surprised there was someone called Thomas Chatterton Williams, and would I like to come and address the Thomas Chatterton Society in Bristol? And so they invited me there, and I came to Bristol, and I start speaking to like all these Chatterton devotees and scholars, and he's got real like a cult following. And I was pulled aside, and one guy was like, I must, the only thing I must take issue with, Chatterton was a smashing success, and he didn't kill himself out of despair. His name has like never like recovered from this like misunderstanding. He was really successful. He was getting a lot of women, and like he had a lot of women. But the arsenic was for the syphilis that he'd contracted because he was a smashing success. And so I was like,
and you were meant to answer for this?
No, so I was like, well, I can't go back and tell my dad, who like took inspiration by this boy, like neglected genius, and say like, actually what had happened was he was sleeping with a lot of prostitutes. He was really successful.
Yeah.
It's not the thing. So
thanks for the tip. That's what I've been doing.
That's not going to be the same inspirational story for my dad. But no, but they were really lovely, and they invited me back again to the Bristol Ideas Festival, and just to talk about my own work, because Chatterton was really interesting, and he was like way ahead of his time. He wrote eclogues against slavery. At a time when Bristol, Liverpool, these are slave ports.
Yeah. And we're talking about like
1700s, 1750s.
Oh, okay, 17.
He wrote against slavery, against the fair-skinned children who run into the land of the sun and dominate the people that they encounter. And so I did my talk, and this older British lady stands up and she says, I don't understand what this night is. What? We didn't talk about the work of Thomas Chatterton at all. What is going on? And who is Thomas Chatterton Williams? And is your brother Lord Percy Bysshe Shelley Williams? What is this?
Also, why is he American?
She was so upset and confused, but like everybody else in the crowd was really nice, and they were like, no, we want to hear this.
That's amazing.
But that was, it's just...
That's just a great story.
Yeah, it's just my father, but on a deeper level, what it was is my father saw the universal human struggle to be somebody, to try to not necessarily have advantages. And he always told me, the thing he always told me was that like, this boy didn't have opportunities you have, you'll bring honor to his name. I named you after him. You'll bring honor to his name. He deserved better than he had. It resonated. My father was very unique, I think, in the world he grew up in, because he wasn't engaging with these things through the lens of color. This was a human kind of situation that resonated with him. This poor black boy in Texas without a father, like looking at this from another time, this poor white boy in Bristol without a father, and something connected with him. And it didn't have to be through the lens of his specific identity or geography or anything like that. It was on a deeper human level. And I think that, in some ways, the way you're named does impact you. I was always aware that like I wore the name of a writer, even though I don't write poetry, but that somehow embedded in my mind as it was possible to be a writer or something. And my dad would tell me, you're a writer, you wear the name of a great writer. Those things kind of get in you.
That's interesting. I thought it was just, you became a writer and then you found out later in life, like, oh, I'm also named after a writer, just happenstance.
No, I was always told that I had to bring honor to this boy's name because he didn't have the opportunities I had.
That's so fucking heavy.
And I remember when I turned 17, I was like, and I turned 18, I was like, okay, I lived longer than Chatterton.
Yeah, because you died at 17 or something.
Yeah.
What is an experience that you've had that was worth every cent?
An experience that I've had that was worth every cent? There's many. That's a difficult question. I think for me, though, the only thing you're talking about an experience that you paid for.
You could have paid. It doesn't need to be in currency, but just an experience that you had that had a cost or whatever that was just worth it. There's something that you remember. That you think you'll remember till the day you die.
I think I'm pretty lucky that I think that I've had a lot of these experiences, but on a larger level, there's a kind of interconnected series of experiences, and the first cost me quite a lot. Like coming and living in France the first time in 2000, like the second time truly, because I lived here for a year right after college, but that was different. But moving here from New York in 2011 cost me everything, all of my savings and everything, and I had to actually. It was the most difficult thing I've ever done. Was I'm not trying to play it up and say that I'm an immigrant, because Americans are treated differently in a lot of these societies, and the French were quite welcoming. But I had to use everything that I had, even into going into the negative, to be able to survive here, and I did. And I guess a couple of years ago, I was able to buy an apartment on my own. Because I'm no longer living with the mother of my children. We're no longer together. So, but I had to buy an apartment in a foreign country, and for me, that was the most difficult thing that I ever did, and I did it on my own, without a recourse, in a society that when I first arrived here, I needed help from everybody to. So it was kind of like coming full circle. And I don't mean to say, like, I mean, my ex and I are extremely close. She's very much a support system for me here, but I did that on my own. I went from being somebody who came here and really was out of his depth, and then I provided a home for my children here, and like solidified a kind of foothold in a way that for me was the only thing that I've ever done like that in my life, because I grew up, we never even owned our own home when I grew up. So but to do that in a foreign country was very difficult. I don't know, that might be not the type of response to the question that you were, it wasn't one experience, but it was like, it was worth every cent. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And it required the most. I think I've never exerted myself like that to make that happen. And to come from where I started to there was something.
Yeah. I mean, like you talk a lot about your parents, in particular your dad, and have you ever had the conversation with him recently just about how your life has turned out? Is it everything that he'd hoped for? Is it more like...
my parents are so supportive and always encouraged, and he's told me multiple times that he's really very proud, because he had always told me that you're a writer, but what he really said is, I studied philosophy. He always, until very recently, I mean, he would always say, no matter what I would say, he would say, you're a philosopher. And I said, well, no, I didn't actually stay with it. I didn't get the PhD. And he's like, no, you're a philosopher. And like, even after I was writing journalism, he was like, no, you're doing philosophy. And it's like, no, I'm really not. I like people who stuck with the discipline would take umbrage. But, he always told me, you're a philosopher, you're a writer. And those were the kinds of ways of using your mind that meant a lot to him. He always told me, I don't care if there's never another Black entertainer or athlete, but I would love there to be another Black writer, or another Black philosopher or something like that. Even though it wasn't that, I don't mean to reduce it to identity, but what he was saying is that the world doesn't need you to think that you have to play basketball. And you're getting a lot of messages that say that.
Yeah. And he was also astute enough to know, I remember I saw you mentioned that he said to you when you were young, you're going to have to try twice as hard.
He did. I think that was the best advice I would give. That, I mean, my kids may or may not have to, but I tell them that that's the best advice you can ever give a kid. I've never understood the kind of, in more recent years, turning on that. I think encouraging a child to make exertions is a very good, because what if they tried twice as hard and they only needed to do half as hard? That's fine.
Yep. You've lost nothing.
You've lost nothing.
Yeah.
But if you try half as hard and you needed to do more, and it was something that you were really going to care about, then you've been failed by the parents that were shepherding you. yeah, he's very satisfied that I'm a writer, but he's biased, so he's always like, every year he's like, they didn't give you a MacArthur this year.
Yeah.
And he's always like why haven't you got this, or why? And it's not because he's greedy, it's because he just wants me, I think, to recognition matters, and that's going back to the name Chatterton. I think recognition matters a lot to somebody who had a lot to give, who wasn't always able to be recognized, and was denied, sometimes unfairly, and sometimes even just on the base of their race in a society. I mean, my dad was fully 27 before civil rights. He was born in 1937. So, so I think for him, anytime that there's a perception that there was even I think when I certainly feel like I've, been recognized for my efforts, but for him, he's protective of that because it's such a thing. It's such a wound that some wounds can't be healed. The sense that that there was a lack of fairness or props were not given. But while there's that, there's also the real satisfaction that, like, books exist and are published, and he reads everything, and so I mean that's nice. It was a big deal for me, my first book to record him really on the page. It's really a father-son memoir, and that I think is. I don't think I could write that now, because actually it was something that had to be written when I was much younger to have that kind of perceptive memory of how it felt to live with him and everything. Like I'm just less in touch with with who I was as a child and all those things. And so I recorded that, and I think that meant a lot to him too, because it's like a written testament that, like, I was listening. And sometimes he forgets that, and my mother can pull it out and be like, no, he does understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
He hears you, he knows it.
Yeah.
And it's also just a way that, my children and even their children will be able to know some things that mattered a lot to us while we were together in this house that we shared. That was my childhood home that won't exist forever,
It's a legacy.
Yeah.
Thomas Chatterton Williams, thank you so much for being on Last Meal.
This was great.
It's
thank you.
Absolute honor. Cheers.
Cheers.
And I'm going to cook you another steak that is just as good, but more recent. And we're going to eat it together.
Recency bias is real.
Yeah, that's right. Cheers.
Cheers.
What struck me most about Thomas is his refusal to let inherited categories define him. The idea that identity isn't something we inherit fully formed, but something that evolves as we move through the world. It's a reminder that who you are isn't fixed. It's shaped by the places you go, the people you love, and the courage to rethink what you've been handed. It's a form of freedom we could all stand to cultivate. And that's all from me.